what I want to address is some of the different methods that we can use to take the research that we've acquired and integrate it into our papers. So you've gone through the process, you've looked through the databases, you've gone through Google Scholar or some other database search in order to find scholarly articles, and you've found a lot of material. Now the question is, how do we take that research and actually put it into our paper in an effective way? And there are three main strategies for doing this. You can use summaries, you can use paraphrases, or you can use direct quotations. I'm going to cover each and talk about some of the things that you might want to keep in mind in order to do this in the most effective way. So here's an example of a sample source that I'm going to use just to demonstrate this process to you. This is one that's from the Broadview Guide to Writing. And I'm going to go over three different ways that we can actually put this into a form that we can use in our body paragraphs of our essay. The first one I'm going to cover is summaries, which is something we've already spoken about a lot. The aim of summaries is to take something big and to boil it down to its essential elements. One of the things to keep in mind for summaries is that it's essential that we accurately represent the source. In a summary, we're not referring to everything that's contained in the source itself, we're just referring to what we think the most essential things are, but it's still important that we get it right. We have to make sure that we're not distorting the original source when we're summarizing it. We need to use original writing when we're doing this. We don't want to borrow too many words or phrases or sentences from the text itself. We want to really put it in our own words. This can be a little bit tricky because in order to accurately represent the source, but to use our own words, we need to really understand what the text is saying. So make sure you spend time close reading the text carefully in order to guarantee that you actually understand it. You also need to include a citation at the end of the summary. Every time you refer to something that's not common knowledge or that is not your own idea, you need to include a citation. So even if you aren't directly quoting anything from the text, the citation still needs to be there. In a summary, you need to make sure that your writing is shorter than the original. You're not trying to refer to everything in the text, you're just referring to the most important ideas that are relevant to your paper. Here's an example of what a summary of that previous passage might look like. You'll note here that I include a citation at the end with the author, date, and page number. And you'll note that this is really a fair representation of what the text itself says. It doesn't include everything that's in the original, but includes quite a bit. The second method that you can use is a paraphrase. This is quite similar to a summary, but there are a few small differences. Generally, a paraphrase is the same length as the original text. The purpose of a paraphrase is not to boil something down, it's to more or less transmit the same information as is in the original, but just to do so using your own original wording. In a paraphrase, you also need to include a citation, but you do not need to include a page number, just the author and the date. One of the things to look out for is that in a paraphrase, it's important that you don't just copy and paste the original and then use a thesaurus or some other synonym generator to change some of the words. It has to actually be an original sentence construction. You can't just slightly tweak the original and pass it off as your own. It's got to be something that comes from you. One strategy that I like to use when I'm coming up with paraphrases is to just try to speak aloud to myself and describe the passage that I'm wanting to include in my writing. After writing down the words that I'm saying to myself, I often come up with a unique wording that captures the essence of the text. Here's an example of a paraphrase of the previous passage that I showed. You'll note I also include the author and date at the end. Now, the final method for integrating sources is to use direct quotations. Direct quotations can be a very powerful way to include the exact words of the source, but there's a few important things that you need to keep in mind. One of the first things that you need to keep in mind is that it's not good to use direct quotations too frequently. If you do this, your own authorial voice can be lost. It's almost like you're hiding behind the words of others. One of the ways for research essays to go wrong is for them to appear almost just like a series of quotes strung together, with very little original contribution in between. When you're writing an essay, you want your voice to be at the forefront. You want your voice to be the dominant one throughout the entire text. So be very choosy when you're using direct quotations. You need to make sure when you are using a direct quotation that you clearly indicate to your reader that the quotation is not from you. So you need to include it within quotation marks, you need to provide a citation, and you will generally want to include a signal phrase, such as the author says, the researcher explains, the scholar relates, some phrase like that to make it clear to your reader who the quotation is actually coming from. Quotations are particularly useful when the specific wording of a sentence matters. Sometimes the text you're looking at will talk about some problem or some statement of fact in a way that's just really well written, efficient, and elegant. There are sometimes where the source you're looking at talks about something in almost the best way you can think of. In those sort of cases, it's okay to use a direct quotation. It's also useful in situations where the quotes you're looking at have a really powerful emotional effect, and that's something that you want to reproduce for your reader. You want to make sure that there's a good reason to use a direct quotation rather than a paraphrase or a summary. Most of the time, you should be summarizing or paraphrasing. Be really careful not to use direct quotations too much. One of the ways that you can make your quotations more efficient is to use things like ellipses and square brackets to make sure that you're only using the portion of the quotation that you absolutely need. You want each word in your quotations and each word in your essay more generally to count. You want each passage to do work for your reader, so only include the portions of the quote that matter. Use ellipses, square brackets to make it fit with your sentences. Here's an illustration of one way to do this. Now, one of the things that you'll note is that I include the signal phrase here, Deacon maintained. You'll also note that I only use a small portion of the passage itself. In general, it's not a good idea to have massive block quotations. Particularly in essays that are short, 3 to 5 pages, you don't really want to drop huge quotations on your reader. Just use the portions of the quotations that are actually relevant. Now, there are several reasons why we cite. The main reason is to ensure that we're giving credit to the authors who are the source of the texts and ideas that we're using, and that we're avoiding plagiarism. Quotations also help to signal to your reader that we actually know what we're talking about. We've done research, we're not just making things up. Citations are also useful just because they make our work look a lot more professional. When I see an essay and it's well formatted, it has proper citations and a proper reference list, I'm expecting it to be a lot better than when I see a paper and there are no in-text citations and there's no reference list at the end. It just gives the sense that the person who's written the essay has really put a lot of care into it and taken the time to do it properly. So it's always a good practice. One of the other reasons why we cite is to provide directions for future reading. If our reader likes what they're reading, then the citations can help them to learn more and to gain more information about the text. If our reader doesn't like what we're writing and disagrees with some of our conclusions, then citations can help them to check our sources and see if we actually are deriving correct conclusions from the research that we're using. In general, we provide a citation anytime we have a direct quotation, a paraphrase or summary of someone else's idea, and really any time that we're referring to information that isn't common knowledge. So we don't need to use a citation when we're talking about facts that pretty much everyone knows, but anytime we're referring to something that is not generally understood, it's a good idea to provide an in-text citation. In APA style, we have two different kinds of citations. In-text citations in the body of the paper and reference list citations at the end. We need to have both. The in-text citations show your reader particular times when you borrow someone else's ideas, but in APA style, the in-text citations don't have a lot of information. The reference list at the end does have a lot of information, and it's where your reader will be going when they want to learn more about each passage. This is an example of what a book citation looks like in APA style in your reference list. Here's an example of a chapter in an edited book collection. Here's what a journal citation looks like. Here's what a website citation looks like. More information about all of these can be found on Canvas. This is what a reference list looks like at the end of the paper. Now, a few things to draw your attention to. One is that you'll note that the reference list is formatted in alphabetical order according to last name. You'll also note that we don't refer to authors' first names here. We just refer to their first initials. One other thing to pay attention to is the title of the reference list is just called References in APA style. The last thing I want you to pay attention to here is how whenever a reference list entry extends over the course of a single line, you then indent all lines after the first one. It just helps to keep things organized so it looks a lot better. You should also use the APA template, which is included on Canvas. Go to the page, find the APA template file, and then use that as the base for your research essay. That should really help you out and give you a good foundation in which to make sure that your paper is properly formatted. I encourage you to make use of citation machines. These can really help you to format your papers properly. They're not always perfect, so it's good to check on them, but it can really save you a lot of time. Just to clarify what we covered here, when you're integrating research into your paper, use summaries, paraphrases, or direct quotations. Include in-text citations and a reference list. Make use of the APA template and use citation generators. These are some things that you can keep in mind when you're trying to figure out how to work all of that great research that you've done into your paper.